Welcome to the video. In this video we're taking a look at this radio here. This is the Turnigy i6s. Now you'll notice that we have quite a lot of radios here that look very similar, and they are all different versions of the same i6s radio with little changes. Now we've already done a video comparing these two here at the back, the black one and the all white and silver one. So what I'd like to do is, now we've got our hands on the Turnigy i6s version, is kind of highlight the differences of this little guy over the other two that we've already had a look at. Now if you want to have a look at the video where we compared the two at the back already, then that's already available on the channel. You can go and watch that and we go through it in quite some detail. But I do need to say a very big thank you to Hobby King for sending us the Turnigy i6s so we can have a look at the differences and explain them to you, our subscribers. So the radio itself, before we get into the detail and look at some of these others, let's get those out of the way and focus on the star of the show, which is this little guy. Now this is a radio which is very inexpensive. At the moment it's only about just over 40 quid, which comes with the radio, and for the Turnigy version you also get some other stuff too. You get two receivers, which is very unusual. We'll look at those in a second. You get the obligatory USB cable for those of you that already haven't got hundreds of those in your pack already, and then we get a nice little manual. Now the standard layout of these radios is pretty much the same, whereas you have a nice backlit LCD screen. So to power it on, you press and hold the two buttons. Very musical, and this is touchscreen, so you can go and you can change the things by moving around in the menus. You also have basic telemetry on here as well. We have loads of switches on the top, so you have a number of 2-position switches and a number of 3-position switches too. You have a couple of sliders on the corner, and you have a couple of touch buttons at the back that you can use either for controls, or you can use them to do things like auto trim, which the majority of these radios kind of do. So what's different about this one over the others? Let's put that to the side and look at the fact that we get these two receivers. Now these are the two receivers that we get. This is the first one. This is a TGY-i6b. We've used this identical receiver with another one of the radios in one of our other videos, and we actually connected it up with a radio very similar to this in our quadcopter building for beginners series. So if you want to see how you set this little guy up and how all that works, then we covered all of that in there. Now that is quite a nice receiver. It's very handy for planes. It's a full 6-channel receiver, but using PPM you can get up to 8 channels out of there. There is also an iBus out. Now iBus is the kind of FlySky version of S-Bus, and it's supported by things like Betaflight and CleanFlight and others. You wire it up and configure it just like you would with S-Bus, but you choose iBus when you set it up. And using iBus you can get up to 10 channels out this radio. That's pretty cool. The other receiver is the one I want to spend a bit more time on, because this is one that we haven't seen on the channel, but this is perfect for those of us who like to fly smaller quadcopters and multirotors. So on this one it's much smaller physically. In fact, we could probably take off a lot of the surrounding material to make it even smaller if we needed to. And on here we have a PPM output, we have an S-Bus output, and we have the VCC to power it, plus 5 volts in the ground, and we have a little battery detection port as well. So this is going to be a super little machine if you want to put it inside a smaller frame like a 250 or below, where space is a little bit tight. And if you go and watch those videos where we use this receiver building our 250 quadcopter, you found that we used an awful lot of room inside the frame just to fit this big guy in. I would have used this receiver if I'd have had it. Now all the radios that are on the bench use the same protocol, so if you're looking at these receivers and you like the look of them, then I'm sure they'll be available separately on the Hobby King website, and I'll put links down in the description for the technology we're talking about. So if you have one of the other radios but you want to get hold of these receivers, I'm sure you'll be able to get hold of them. I will definitely be thinking about getting hold of a couple more. Now, as we talked about in the other videos, there are a couple of little drawbacks with these guys. The first drawback, of course, is that there aren't any trims on here. Now, the lack of trims mean that for pilots flying fixed wing, It's less intuitive. For those of us like me that've flown fixed wing for a very long time, you're used to just kind of reaching down and putting a couple of clicks of trim in whatever direction you need. This has kind of an auto trim function. Hobby King has already shown it, and the way it works is you kind of enable it in the firmware, and then when you're flying the plane nice and level, you kind of press the little button on the back, and that stores the trim in the radio. So this, I would say, is much more useful for things like multicopters, but it does support up to 5 models. So in here we have details for reverse, endpoints, auxiliary channels, we've got the sub trim and the trims, we have a couple of mixes, failsafe, receiver bind, stick mode, model select, so we can have up to 5 different models, and that's great. So even though this is a little cheap and cheerful 40 quid radio, you can then, if you have lots of these receivers, install it on up to 5 different models. And I know there's been a little bit of feedback around, well, 5 isn't a lot at all. But if you want more than 5 models, there are lots of other radios that are a lot more expensive that give you a lot more features that I'd be looking at instead. These radios are ones that I'm using with newer pilots or with newer builds, which don't break the bank but give you a really nice experience when you're flying. Now let's talk about the differences here over the other ones that we've already had a look at. Obviously, the first thing you're probably spotting here is these gimbals are different. So if I move these receivers and some bits and bobs out of the way, let's talk about some of the differences between this guy and the black version. The gimbals, if I use this one, are much smoother on the Hobby King one. Now there's nothing wrong with the gimbals on the other versions of the IA6, but they are only kind of okay. If you're using more expensive radios, they do feel a little bit stiff, not particularly nice. They have upgraded the gimbals for the Hobby King one, and the Hobby King gimbals are very smooth indeed. They're a lot nicer. They still don't feel like the gimbals you get on a $200 or $300 radio, but actually I prefer these personally to the ones on the others. So that's great from Hobby King. Well done for kind of making that addition. That's a really nice change. The other thing that you may have noticed when we did the other videos is that the other radios tend to come with something like this. Now this actually fits on the top of the radio, and rather than fit this live, let me get the white one back. This is a great big whacking support that goes on the top for something like an FPV screen or something else if you wanted to mount it. Now that comes on a lot of other versions that are out there. It doesn't come on this Turnigy version. Now that's not potentially a problem. I don't tend to use screens with these smaller radios anyway. I have tested it. Those holders work great with up to 7-inch diversity receivers. So the 5802D and things like the FlySight Black Pearl are all work really nicely with it, but that's probably as big as you want to go. But if you're using something that connects to a little Android device, then they're great. It looks like Turnigy decided not to include that, but instead actually give us 2 different receivers instead. So just a slightly different choice. Personally, after using these for quite a while, I'm finding that I'm not using these kind of connectors very much. But if that's something that you really want, be aware that it doesn't come with the Hobby King Turnigy version. Last thing I'll talk about is the firmware. Every single manufacturer of these things seem to have their own bespoke version of the firmware for the particular radio. Now we've already gone through and set up some of these others, and I've just very briefly shown you the menu on this one here. Let me power this one up. Do you like that music? And this is running on the later version, and on this one you can see we have function and we have sys, whereas if we go into the menu on here you only get the setup menu. Now this improved firmware is available on a number of the other models at the moment. I'm sure that Turnigy will come out with it, so do check the files tab, but in this one it gives you some extra functions that are really useful. The ones that I really like are the fact that you could do things like add a throttle curve in this later update, and also things like rate and exponential, which are very happy when you're flying. So do keep an eye on that as well, because one of these radios didn't come with the latest version, and in fact I've ended up flashing both of the others that we've been looking at with it, so no doubt there'll be an update available for this Turnigy version as well. So in summary, those are the big differences. First of all, that you don't get the holder for something like an FPV screen or your iPhone or something else to go on the top. You do get 2 receivers with the kit, which is awesome. I really like this receiver. I'm very tempted to get a couple of others for the other radios and builds that I'll be doing for people, as this is going to be a lot easier to fit inside stuff than the bigger one. And the gimbals are a big improvement over the other two. They're much nicer. So again, big thumbs up to Hobby King for doing that, because they do feel better. Just be aware and keep your eyes open for that firmware update, because if you're wanting to do things like being able to set throttle curves so you can flatten the throttle around things like the hover point on your multi-rotor, or set rates and expo so that you can deaden the sticks around the middle position, then it's going to need a firmware update. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel, and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.